Good morning, it's Kevin Kenny. This is the Build Series live in New York City, and we're about to be joined on stage by an artist who is readying to drop her 13th studio album, get this, conveniently enough, on September 13th. Please give it up for Azam Ali. Azam's taking some photos backstage right now. In the meantime, let's check out the music video for the title track off that album, Phantoms. introducing myself. Azam Ali, everyone.
Thank you.
They caught us off guard there. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. I'm so honored to be here.
This is so cool. Your first time to build, I understand.
Yes, absolutely. I've seen so many interviews. I never imagined I'd be here.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
We're really happy you are.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
How often are you in New York?
Not that often, but maybe a few times a year.
Okay, cool.
So I'm coming every time I come, right?
Yeah, exactly, right? Book it now. No, what do you like about the city? I'm always curious for people that aren't from here, that especially artists.
I think what I like most about here, because we miss that in LA, is just human contact. You know,
Right.
Everybody's in their cars in LA. It's nice to be able to just walk in the street and just, even though people are not as friendly as I would like here, you know, in terms of just saying hello and. But it's nice just having that human connection. That's my favorite thing.
It's funny. I've bands have told me that are LA based that it's a bit of an isolated city, right? Because you're doing all these different things, and there's pockets. You know, there's pockets here too. There's different neighborhoods, but it melds together because of that contact. And it's I know a lot of artists that gravitate towards it because of that. But that's
yes. I mean, that's the hardest thing about LA is it's so isolated. But in many ways, I find it's very conducive for creativity because. You are so much in your own world that you end up just creating a much more... You're forced to create an inner world for yourself because there's not that much going on the outside.
Right. Are you an artist that, to that point, when you're making music, you don't like to listen to maybe other people's music? You don't like to listen to outside music?
That's not true. Actually, I find most of my inspiration from listening to other music.
Okay.
And then it inspires me to see how deep, you know, you can go. But always you have to be careful that your music doesn't become derivative, that it's inspired by other art, but not. But then it's not derivative.
Right. Well, how do you do that? Because it's so tough, right?
Not for me, actually. It's very easy. I think it's about just being really honest with yourself. I think when you create something, you have to be fearless in terms of how much you want to expose who you really are. And then once you do that, I mean, you're often tapping into sort of darker places and painful places. And then from that point, it's really about transformation, being able to transform your pain into something that can bring illumination, you know. So it's, I think once you're able to go to that deep of a place in yourself and be willing to share that, you know, you may be inspired, like my album is inspired by so many bands that I loved, but I find that it's still unique in terms of my own voice, you know. Yeah,
you talk about that fearlessness to explore within as an artist. You've said in past interviews about this Phantoms record that this is your most vulnerable in years. How have you achieved that?
Well, Phantoms, the concept behind the album is really about how we develop multiple personas, and all of us have that, you know. You think of all the people just you can be, depending on who you are with and the context, you know. And I really thought about my past and my present and all the phantoms that have existed within me. So the album really, for me, is about reconciling all the phantoms within myself, because a lot of the music was inspired by kind of who I was and what I listened to in the 80s and 90s. So that's why, for me, it became a transformation and reconciling all the phantoms within myself.
Right. You came here in the 1980s. You came stateside in 1985. Do you remember your first musical memory once you were in the United States?
My first musical memory was a Depeche Mode concert, and it blew me away.
Really?
Yes, it was outdoor. I think I was underage, actually. A friend of mine, an older friend of mine, took me, and it was amazing. It was really incredible. You know, that was kind of probably my first introduction to electronic music. You know, it was Depeche Mode, and then it evolved into sort of other music from the 80s. Massive Attack was,
right.
Well, they're not really 80s, but you know, Portishead, all of that.
Yeah.
But really, Depeche Mode was that first experience I had of hearing electronic music, keyboards, and, you know, of course, such amazing musicians. And it all began there.
Did they call it electronic back then? When is of course now in retrospect we think of it, but like how was it thought of?
I mean, it evolved into maybe more industrial music,
Yeah.
but I don't know. There wasn't really a maybe synth pop or dark wave. I don't.
Yeah.
So many different names. I hate all those boxes.
Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah, I think of like the mid-'80s, 1985 as a time where you have access to so much great music, right? There's hard rock out, there's pop going on, hip-hop's, bubbling up too, and of course, alternative music, electronic music. What do you think it was about that music, Depeche Mode, that you gravitated towards as opposed to other music?
Melody. Melody for me is everything, and maybe Not that rock doesn't have it, because also during that time when I was in high school was the first Guns N' Roses album came out. And to this day, I think it's still one of the best albums. It's a phenomenal album. But what makes it amazing is the melodies are amazing. Depeche Mode and all the bands that I mentioned, a lot of the shoegazing music from the 80s and sort of music of the post-punk movement, a lot of it became very melody-driven. So
Yeah.
I respond to that because I love melody. I'm always searching for those few magical notes that you can listen to over and over again.
Yeah, the earworms, right?
Yes.
When you, as an artist in present day, find yourself going back to your formative years, the 80s, the 90s, for inspiration, what does that say about where you are at right now as an artist?
I think... I don't think so much about where I am, but I think what I'm always striving for is being able to meet my potential. And I feel I've gotten closer, but not quite there yet. And I hope I will never feel that I'm there yet, because then I will stop evolving.
Right.
So it's just about meeting my potential and experimenting and exploring. I never imagined I would do a record like this. When I sat down to do a solo album, I thought, okay, I would like to produce an electronic album on my own, but what's it going to be like? And then once I did, once I composed one song and then two songs, and then it just kind of became, it was so organic, it led me this way.
Yeah.
Music has always been that way for me. I'm not one of those conceptual artists. I don't I don't always have an idea of what I want to do. I just sit and I kind of mess around with sounds and melodies, and then I let it tell me what it wants to be.
So you just organically kind of looked back for inspiration on this one.
Well, what was strange is, also I have a world electronic band, so I really didn't want to do anything kind of world influence. I was trying to just push myself in a different direction, and then I discovered I was tapping into a lot of sort of choosing sounds that were very 80s and 90s, and then those were inspiring certain lyrics and melodies, and I thought, that's interesting, so let's see where this is going to go. And then once I started making the album, I thought, this is the kind of album I think I'm wanting to buy, but I'm not finding out there. I think sometimes for artists, it's also like that. You make music that you want to hear.
Absolutely. When did the title Phantoms come about? Was that something that led the project, or was it something that came about at the end?
When I composed the song Phantoms, the video you just played,
right.
when I composed that song, then I knew that that's what the album should be, because then I started thinking about the concept of that I was exploring an aspect of who I am that nobody knows about. It's nobody knows about what I lived in the 80s and what I did. Thankfully, Facebook didn't exist then. Yeah. There is no evidence. So it was, a lot of it became about exploring that aspect of who I am, and then reconciling my past and my present. So that's when the title seemed appropriate.
Do you, when you reconcile all those multidimensional sides, or phantoms, if you will, right, these ghosts of our former selves, how do you arrive at a sense of central being, right, like, or a sense of identity, right? Are there some you disown? Are there some you embrace? Is it a bit of marrying the two?
Well, I think there comes a point where you kind of, for me, what reconciliation feels like, self-reconciliation feels like, is when I'm able to sort of forgive myself and accept myself with all the complexities, you know, and not think in terms of dualistic and analysis, you know, black or white or good or bad, where it just kind of becomes one unified whole. And that, in effect, I think, connects you to everyone and everything in the universe. You know, you develop a sort of unconditional love for everyone and everything, but only when you're able to kind of make that happen for yourself.
Yeah. There's 9 tracks on the album. Is that a great job of editing on your behalf, or was this a concerted effort? You went in with 9 and you left with 9.
Well, my songs are not also traditional, you know, 3-minute songs, because I'm not writing for radio. You know, it's not a pop album in that sense. So my songs go between 5 to 7 minutes. So I think more than 9 minutes would have been too long for a lot of people, even though I had 4 more songs that I didn't put on the album. So more to come.
Yeah, no, of course. When you cut those 4, is it for all different sorts of reasons, or is it because it doesn't fit with the narrative, or how do you determine those 4? It must be a tough decision.
Well, the 4 that I didn't use were much more minimal, you know, in terms of so they kind of felt like maybe they want to be their own thing. This is still a very produced and dense album. So the other 4 that didn't make it were not as dense in terms of elements. You know.
And it's the first entirely English album you're going to give us, right?
Yes, the first entirely English. I did another album in 2006, Elysium for the Brave, and that had around 4 or 5 English songs on it, but I was not completely ready to go there, you know. Now I was.
Why now?
Well, I'm so critical of myself, and I'm such a passionate music lover still to this day, that I wanted to be sure that the music I would produce, if I was going to write English songs, that they would be on par with the works of legends or my own musical idols, so that I could sit back and say, you know, for me, this is as good. And I was there.
How did you get involved with the worlds of television and film and video games? Which came first? Because there's so much to talk about on that end.
I know, but actually it happened quite accidentally, really from my records. A film composer had heard my work, one of my albums, and then I got called in, and it started with doing little movie trailers here and there. I think one of my first jobs was singing for the trailer for the first Lord of the Rings film, and it started with little jobs like that. And it's such a small world with composers that they just recommended me to their friends, and I never even had an agent. And before I knew it, I was working with the best composers, and then that led to video games and TV shows, and you know, it was a very organic path.
Yeah. How similar are the processes of tracking songs for a video game versus like a movie or a TV show?
I love doing video games the most because you have the most creative freedom.
Okay.
Whereas for movies, it's the restrictions are there are a lot of restrictions, and a lot of times you can't really do what you're feeling because it doesn't really suit the part. So a lot of it is trying to understand and interpret what either the director or the composer is looking for. So you have to approach that work with a little bit more detachment, which is not something I'm very good at. But once I'm able to get that, I'm able to put emotion into it.
Right. Speaking of creative direction, I should mention you wrote and produced the entire record, right?
Yes,
That's
I'm
awesome.
I'm very proud of that.
Yeah.
Because, you know, it's such a difficult in the electronic music scene. I mean, there are some amazing women, but I really want to kind of help break through that glass ceiling even more and encourage more and more women to produce music for themselves. And I think it's really easy nowadays. It's all out there, and it just requires commitment and time and just learning. But there is so much liberation in being able to produce music for yourself. So for me, it's a personal, it's a monumental achievement.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. Let's get to some fan questions, actually. The first is going to come by way of Twitter. It comes from @RayB. Are there any current Persian bands that you enjoy?
Current Persian bands. I can't think of any.
No. Well, how about it in general? I was just going to ask you this. Well, what bands are you, or artists, whoever, or what are you listening to in your free time right now?
Well, there's so many. There are a lot of artists. I like a lot of also cinematic music that like I love Olafur Arnalds. I love Trent Moeller. I love. The list is just so long. I love Fever Ray. I love, and then there's a lot of world music I listen to. I also love folk music from different parts of the world because it's so much about it. There's so many stories about people and the culture. So I listen to music from all over the world, you know.
Yeah, that's awesome. Right on. Let's get to some in-studio questions. The first is going to come from over here.
Hi.
Hi.
I wanted to ask, how do you go about making your music versatile from other artists? And was that intentional when you first started off?
How did I start I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
How did you go about making your music versatile from other artists? And was that intentional when you first started off?
How did I make it versatile from other artists? You mean different from other artists?
Yeah.
Well, as I said, you know, I think you can make music that is inspired, so it has maybe it gives you sort of the same emotional response, but I think it's important to explore and find your own unique voice. And I think part of why I love electronic music is you have access to so many instruments and so many sounds. You know, if I was just playing guitar and singing, I would be limited in terms of what I could do. But with electronic music, you have, you know, so many options. So then I think using different sounds to create your own language.
Great question. We have time for one final fan question. It'll come from behind me.
Hi, this is a question from our website, buildseries.com. If you could collaborate with any artist living or dead, who would you want to collaborate with?
That's an easy one for me, David Sylvian. I love David Sylvian, and he's one of my musical heroes, and he's not making that much music anymore, but if there was one person I could collaborate with, it would be him.
Thank you.
Question. You've also collaborated with Peter Murphy?
Yes, I've collaborated with a lot of people. Peter Murphy, Serge Tankian from System of a Down, Crystal Meth, so many artists. The King Crimson, the musicians from King Crimson, they played on one of my solo albums and I've sang on their music. So I've been very honored to work with some amazing artists.
Yeah. Well, we're honored to have you here on Build.
Thank you
again,
so much.
every time now when you're
in New York. Every time, that's it. We're going to book it right now.
Yes, exactly. You heard it here first. Phantoms is out everywhere September 13th, guys. One more time for Azam Ali.